I'm from Manitoba, Manituota, which in Cree speaks about there's spirit here, and that specifically speaks to where the lake's narrow, and we used to acknowledge hearing spirits there. And so that particular place, Manituota, where the lake's narrow in Manitoba, that's from a Cree perspective where the phrase Manitoba, Manituota, comes from. There was a time when we would be able to be on the lake and drink the water from the lake. We can't do that anymore. Even if you go into some of the more isolated areas in Manitoba, you never know for sure the kind of impact that the water, the lakes, the rivers have experienced. So it's always you're always left wondering whether you could drink that or not. Whereas before it never used to be a worry. In my own community we used to have wells, and while it was pretty hard water, we still drank that water. With the changes that have happened around, for example, the farmers' fields and creating drainage ditches that run straight into some of the rivers, that our community is on, Fisher River, that impacted us greatly. Not just in terms of floods, which is a whole other water issue in terms of beyond boil water advisories, but it impacted whether we could eat the playing in the water, the drinking the water, etc. So we got to a point where we needed treatment plants. And that's what many communities are like, is that the water always has to be treated and taken care of. There's many communities that don't have treatment plants, or treatment plants aren't running the way that they need be. A lot of that is tied to the kind of support that is received to make sure that they have the correct treatment in place, the correct people trained to take care of the treatment places, the upkeep, etc., all these kinds of things. But the fiscal matters are greater than that, and so what ends up happening is some treatment plants aren't all what they're supposed to be, or they're built in ways that just don't make sense for community, for example. As a result, then there's many communities that are on boiled water advisories, and there's many that are on long-term boiled water advisories, meaning 12 months of the year. At least they've been on boiled water advisory for 12 months. While that number has been going down recently, it's still present. The impact of that, again, as I mentioned, varies on one community to another. For one community, it may mean that they have no water supply because they have to depend on a truck hauling water to bring in water because they can't build the pipes in the rock to have running water in the community. So I know of a community where people are still going down to the lake to break through water to get water for washing, for example. And the other water, they have to buy jugs of water. When you're a fly-in community, that's pretty tough. And so you have to find other ways to be able to take care of the water so that you can drink it. So it varies from that kind of scenario where people don't have running water in their community and going down to the lake to be able to get water still, to communities that don't have the treatment facilities running the way that they should be. With that said, there are communities that are managing with proper facilities that have been able to get the support to put in the treatment facilities, to have regular maintenance, for example, because they had enough people to speak up about the issue, for example. The reason I say it these ways, the matter doesn't have to do with a particular community. It has to do with who holds the responsibility to make sure there's proper drinking water. And for First Nations in particular, that's the federal government. And so the way that the federal government's dealing with First Nations historically and even currently is very different than they have addressed any other community. Whereas historically, federal government has been the standards, expectations of itself regarding First Nations is abysmal. It has been horrible. the government would have not been able to get away with the things that First Nations have faced, compare if that was happening in non-First Nations communities. We've seen that happen, where one community would be under boil water advisory, or people getting sick from the water, and the kind of reaction the federal government, the public has. But yet those same kind of conditions are ongoing in some First Nations. And so there's a significant inequity in the federal government in particular living up to its responsibilities. So the impact of all that is great. It's more than just being able to drink water. When you think about the sacredness of water for Indigenous peoples, in particular First Nations in this case, and for my own nation, the Cree Nation, when you think about the sacredness of water and how it's being treated, there's a real disconnect on the way people, First Nations, want to go forward and how they are being forced to go forward. That disconnection then causes more than just trying to figure out how to access water, but it in some ways attacks your whole value base, your whole philosophy, your whole worldview about the meaning and importance of water. So I think it's much greater than just having a boil of water advisory when you start looking at the bigger understanding of the importance of water.